This is the worst possible escalation of what happened yesterday in Saxony-Anhalt. No one is talking about it, but yesterday the AfD was handed the golden key to the state. As long as they only get the absolute majority, which by the way is at 47% and not more. And I'm telling you what I discussed yesterday with a constitutional judge who, by the way, is from the SPD and not from the CDU, shocked me to my core. They have opened the door wide for the AfD to govern in Saxony-Anhalt and to do so exactly as they want. In theory, they could now initiate their own constitution that would override everything that has ever existed except for federal law. All the data, all the facts, and I will also tell you where I mentioned them. You can check it in this video. And if you want to support this channel, I would really appreciate a like and a subscription.
Until next time, a parliament can't just decide everything. A government is bound by the law.
Come on, hand on heart. Who has ever heard of Article 146 of the Basic Law? So, the moment you actually write a constitution, the basic law would be suspended. By the way, a constitutional judge explained that to me yesterday. After that vote took place, he told me, and I quote, "I felt sick to my stomach when I found out yesterday that the parties are taking this path." I'm really afraid for the future in Saxony-Anhalt. For example, there are these eternity clauses here. That's what you've always put forward. Yes, for example, bringing people with a German passport to Madagascar. I have to be a bit careful here. So mass deportations or maybe making some Nazi slogans legal again or something like that. None of that is possible. They can't do that either. Theoretically, they would need a 2/3 majority in the state for that. They would also have to infiltrate the courts and the police at the same time. At the same time, the ministry, allowing ministries like that again in Germany, because security mechanisms have been put in place that actually make it impossible to override the eternity clauses. What happened yesterday actually plays into the hands of the AfD. But as a metaphor, Spiegel summed it up perfectly yesterday. Just listen to this clip for a moment.
The Strait of Hormuz is closed, and we respond by abolishing skin cancer screening.
Just very briefly. And that's extremely important also for the next video coming up. Theoretically, the AfD could if they had an absolute majority. And in the latest polls, which haven't been published by INSA, you only get them if you have a subscription. Technically, the AfD is already at 45%. That means they're just 2% short of an absolute majority. If they get that, they can undo anything they don't like, yeah? Then they just won't care at all. But anything that suits them to govern better, they can keep. And to come back to the judge's quote, "It made me feel sick." What they did there is, if the AfD were to get an absolute majority, they've been given the golden key. But since the AfD doesn't know that yet, they voted against it yesterday. And especially through the constitutional amendment, or rather through the pressure they were able to exert now. They can do it with an absolute majority in Saxony-Anhalt. If they make life better there, they would put extreme pressure on this federal government. Now just imagine the people in Saxony-Anhalt suddenly become happy because the constitution is changed, because so much money is saved, because they have a say. For example, who would be allowed to enter these states and so on? Who can be deported to other states? For example, through payment cards or something like that, or bread, bed and soap.
We say yes to remigration, and we say yes to terminating the state media treaty, dear friends, here in Saxony-Anhalt.
Everything is possible, we just have to do it. That's exactly what the other parties want to put a stop to.
So, and now, the Constitutional Court judge explained that to me very well. They couldn't have acted differently because otherwise the AfD would have gone directly to the ECJ and they would have shut the whole thing down. They can't remigrate. What they're planning is a completely different move. How lucrative would Saxony-Anhalt actually be if a payment card were introduced? And if you, let's say, paid out the money you get from this through other collection points, if you made that punishable by law? And at the same time, these people, and by the way, that would also be legal, were simply put into huge centers. None of this goes against human dignity because there is no space available. If you were to go even further and say that Germans simply have priority when apartments are listed and so on, then of course the atmosphere would be significantly improved. But since migrants are not able to, for example, sign rental contracts with their payment cards and so on, and if this continues to be restricted, this country would become absolutely unattractive for migrants. And with that, the term remigration has been introduced much more effectively. Now each citizen would have about 19 euros more in their wallets, but they have to spend 30 euros more on fuel. Now, for example, there are still things like the churches, the church tax, and so on. For example, that would also be eliminated for many companies that have nothing to do with the church and don't go down that route themselves. Now, such a citizen would, on average, we calculated that yesterday, the two of us together. Now, a citizen who works a normal job would have about 200 to 300 euros more per month. How would that affect the climate, or rather, how much pressure would that put on the other federal states? You can think about that yourselves. What that would mean for this federal government if taxpayers suddenly had a lot more money in their wallets, but only in Saxony-Anhalt or Mecklenburg-Vorpommern.
Every single citizen is not powerless against the state. That's exactly how it should continue to be in Saxony-Anhalt in the future.
That's not entirely correct. What he's saying there is actually a lie. Germany voted center-right and is getting left-wing policies. But, and this individual citizen is not powerless anyway. If this individual citizen has a lot of money, for example, he could go to the Constitutional Court with good lawyers. Every citizen is free to do that. However, according to the latest official survey, 38% are simply excluded because the laws are being changed. So here too you should be a bit careful with the wording. Now I'll quote the constitutional judge again, who told me we can't exclude the AfD anymore. And honestly, and by the way, I really can't say it. We can't exclude them anymore. We have to work with them somehow. And getting a party ban through, that's completely impossible. We have nothing to go on. And yes, just because Höcke and Kubitschek sometimes make extremely harsh statements, that's not enough to ban an opposition party. And we all know that. And technically speaking, there's nothing we can do here. Unless we ourselves break the laws, only to then lose at the European Court of Justice. And at the latest, that's when there will be a huge problem, and we would turn the AfD into an absolute martyr, with people flocking to it in droves. If they lose in German courts, then go to the ECJ and file a lawsuit there, and they say, hey, everything in Germany is corrupt. At the latest, this is where the whole system would collapse, and they know that too.
They admit they don't want to discuss content, but instead focus on hindering a potential AfD agenda, not on doing our best.
Again, that's not entirely correct, because that's also part of the truth. People either talk about content or simply steal it from the AfD. You might remember the budget or the alternative budget proposed by the AfD. The federal government has now submitted that too. So these tax cuts that are supposed to come now, back then, that was the budget that complied with the debt brake. By the way, there will be another video later. Lars Klingbeil is now allowed to take on as much debt as he wants. Or 4 to 8 billion. Nobody knows exactly to bridge this crisis, but more on that this afternoon. I don't want to spoil too much about it yet. However, right now in the States, people are only thinking about one thing. How can you, quote unquote, prevent an AfD government? Because they could definitely somehow govern on their own now. That's why all other topics like how to relieve the citizens are put on the back burner. What? Which is of course legitimate. But they also know that because of the constitutional law, what I just told you, it is now possible to topple entire state governments. And we saw it happen in Thuringia. There, things were blocked several times that they didn't like, things that, for example, would have been in the interest of the citizens. And anyone who still claims that a Höcke or even a Kubitschek is pulling the strings in the background of the AfD is definitely lying. And we all know that because the majority rules here. And we see that again and again at the party conventions. They implement exactly what the voters and members actually want.
Here, the leaders of the parliamentary groups from the federal parliament, the state parliaments, and the European Parliament meet. Their topic: how can the firewall be removed, and does the AfD want to pursue possible participation in government?
And this conversation will be extremely important for everyone. In the next few days, we will definitely find out how things will continue there. Why? Let me explain that to you very briefly. There are a few topics where the CDU and AfD will never come together. The CDU wants to support Ukraine. The AfD wants to buy Russian oil again. These two parties will never see eye to eye on that, and they know it too. But there are also topics like what we just mentioned: taxes, the welfare state, and NGO funding. We're seeing all of that now. They're actually pretty close to each other on those issues. And the real question now is, do you want this minority government? Do you want this government? Or do you want to take on government responsibility? Or maybe you just want to support the CDU from the outside to make this country better and then present yourself at the next elections like, yeah, look at that. But we help the CDU so that they can get this minority government through its full term smoothly. And now you can also vote for the original, which of course is not what the CDU wants at all, if something like that really gets around. Just imagine if the AfD would only agree to what we actually need here in Germany to improve people's quality of life. But for example, they could, in quotes, simply stop funding Ukraine for now, unless the SPD, the left, and the Greens vote along. But then that wouldn't be so certain anymore, because the CDU would be working together with the AfD. We also don't know what that would mean in terms of political unrest here, and that's definitely something that's being discussed in Berlin. But the fact is, if in 5 months the AfD gets a minority majority in Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania, and Saxony-Anhalt, then the mood here could change. And then, well, the CDU won't need a firewall to the left or right anymore because it will be practically dead. They have dug their own grave. By trying to save the economy, the country, and the climate together with socialists. And what they have just decided now in the Saxony-Anhalt State Parliament was really just the next, let's say, the next stop. To completely ruin a federal state, because they were afraid that the AfD could make use of the blocking minority, but if they get the absolute majority, then they have far more power and authority than before. And here I really have to say it again. I don't understand how anyone could be so stupid. And if you're interested in what else the constitutional judge had to say, I could theoretically, and I even got the right to do so, blur him out myself and also distort his voice. Then I could basically upload this conversation for you. If you're interested, please let me know in the comments below. I'll check how many people have responded. And if that's the case, I'll upload it for you in the evening. That's also why there was no video yesterday evening, because we talked for hours. When it comes to the topic of laws, when it comes to the topic of the European Court of Justice, and also when it comes to the topic in general. Stopping the AfD, even with a majority in the Constitutional Court, would be practically impossible. To ban an opposition party based on the points that actually exist.